I think we should get started. Thanks everybody for coming to now I forgot the title. When insiders become the threat. We are here to talk about a very significant, probably the largest election security breach that's occurred in the United States that you may or may not have even heard of. I'm Susan Greenhalgh with Free Speech for People. I'm going to act a little bit as moderator and also presenter. Marilyn Marks is going to start us off. She's going to talk about how she actually came to uncover one aspect of this large breach that occurred in multiple states and started pulling the threads to see how they were connected. I'm going to talk a little bit about how they're connected. David Jefferson is going to talk about how this can affect election security, and Jessica Burbank is a reporter from Dropsite News who is going to talk a little bit about her reporting on this and what she learned when she saw how these breaches were connected. So we'll turn it over to Marilyn to get started.
All right, can you hear me okay? All right, I'm Marilyn Marks, Executive Director of Coalition for Good Governance. We are the organizational plaintiffs behind the Curling v. Raffensperger case, trying to get rid of the Dominion BMDs in Georgia. So it is in that context that I was able to stumble onto the first signs of what we think is the largest voting system breach ever in the history of the country. And thank goodness there were tapes, because otherwise I don't think the world would know about this today. What was copied was all of the software of Georgia. It came out of Coffee County, a little rural county, red county in Georgia. The data was copied from the 2020 election as well as the US Senate runoff in January 2021. They took everything. Election management software, the software on all the components, the electronic poll book. It's been over 4 years. There has been no real investigation or any mitigation of all the damage done. Not only did they take the Georgia software, but the Dominion software that is installed in about 30 states is very, very similar to the Georgia software. So how did this happen to surface? I happened to be at home on a Sunday night. I must have been bored because I took a call from a stranger, and he started threatening me. I won't bore you with all of that backstory, but I thought I better hit the record button here, and decided to go into my little old lady mode and just sweetly let this guy talk to me. And at one point in the conversation, David, this is what he said. And you want to hold your microphone near that. At a point in the conversation, he said, hey, and I'm the guy who hired the jet that went to Coffee County, and we copied everything. And he said, and it was the same people who we got to go to Michigan and copied everything there. And I'm like, what? you copied all of the hard drives? And he says, oh yeah, we copied all the hard drives. Well, I was really glad I had a recording. And okay, this was, a year goes by. I can't convince anybody that this could possibly be true, but it was. Even in April of the next year, 2022, the Secretary of State's office was saying it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Turns out they knew it had happened, but they were still claiming there is no evidence that anything like this happened. We started making demands on the Coffee County office to ask for video records. Nope, didn't happen. Absolutely did not happen. Finally, in June of 2022, the court gave us permission to issue subpoenas, even under subpoena. Let's just wait if we have time. In response to subpoenas, the Coffee County office said, no, there were no videotapes. This didn't happen. Didn't happen. Finally, in May of 2022, the Washington Post broke the story. We kept after this, and finally, in August of 2022, these non-existent videos suddenly surfaced. They had them all along. They had days and days worth of videos that showed the people in the rooms. On August 26th, they were claiming it's exterior only. All we see is the front door, nothing else. A month later, guess what? The interior videos finally showed up, despite all of these denials. And the whole time, the Secretary of State was saying that, David, I can't make this proceed. Can you help me get to the next slide? Sorry, guys. So we had lots of denials. I will keep going while he's looking to get back to us, because what we were going to show you was a clip next from there. Okay, can you play that? This is a clip from CNN.
The newly obtained surveillance video shows a Republican county official and a team working for Trump attorney Sidney Powell inside a restricted area of the local elections office in Coffee County, Georgia. Among those seen, Kathy Latham, a former GOP chairwoman of Coffee County, who is under criminal investigation for posing as a fake elector in 2020. Latham previously claimed she was not personally involved in the breach, but the video appears to undercut that claim, showing her inside as a team of Republican operatives work on computers near election equipment and proceed to access voting data. Scott Hall, an Atlanta bail bondsman and Fulton County Republican poll watcher, is one of the people who spent hours inside the restricted area, and in audio obtained by CNN, Hall later described what he did.
I'm the guy that chartered the jet to go down to Coffee County to have them inspect all of those computers, and I've heard zero. Okay? I went down there, we scanned every freaking ballot.
The Georgia Secretary of State's office calls what happened in Coffee County criminal behavior, and a state criminal investigation is underway. But election experts say the damage could be even bigger than the illegal accessing of voting equipment in Georgia and other parts of the country. These operatives may be undermining the security of elections in the future. The newly obtained surveillance video
Even though the Secretary of State made the comment that this was criminal behavior, virtually nothing has been done in Georgia. It's all been swept under the rug. But very quickly, Sidney Powell, an advisor, a lawyer for President Trump, had arranged for people to go in, paid them for this visit. Susan's going to tell you about the connections that there were among a network of people being paid to do this. They had access in Coffee County to the entire election management system. They pulled all of the data and software that was used in the 2021 Senate runoff as well. They came back on the 18th and 19th of January after their visit first on January the 7th. They were back for 2 more days, access to anything they wanted, and then they came back again for an entire week in January later that year. So they copied more data, tested the machines, and they even talked about should they try to do anything with this or hold this information, hold what they had found for a movement, a bigger movement at a later date. That's what we're here concerned about. I'm going to jump ahead just to say very quickly that this planning started right after the election in Linden Woods, Tomotley Plantation in South Carolina. A group of Trump allies met down there, began to plan for how are we going to get access. Fast forward to December of 2020 when they were meeting at the Willard Hotel and began to determine we've got to have access to more software, to how the systems work. Culminated in a meeting in the White House on December 18th, 2020, and where there were decisions made to, shall we go after voluntary access through insiders, or shall we try to get the military to get the machines? They decided on the voluntary access, and basically they were able to achieve it, as Susan will tell you, across multiple states. And as I said, nothing yet has been done in Georgia to mitigate or really investigate. The software remains out there at great danger to the 2026 election.
Thank you. Great. Okay, people can hear me? Okay, can we start my slides?
Hit the down arrow button.
Hit the down arrow button. Okay. So how did we fit into this? I was serving as a consulting expert to Maryland's lawsuit, to the plaintiffs, Coalition for Good Governance, Maryland's lawsuits. As she mentioned, the court gave her discovery once they uncovered that the breach had really happened in Coffee County, and the judge believed her when she said, this guy called me and said, we got access to the machines, and the judge allowed them to take discovery. They got documents, they got records, they got the ability to take depositions. It was because of the discovery that they got the videos. And so the course in taking the depositions, and we're talking about, and so when she got this first, it did get covered in the press. CNN covered it. The Washington Post covered it. This was in the summer of 2022. And then in the fall, she started taking depositions. She and her attorney started taking depositions. I was permitted to watch the depositions. So in the course of one of the depositions, or several depositions, people that were involved in this breach were being asked, have you been contacted by law enforcement? Have you been contacted by the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Georgia state investigators? We were told, no. And that got our organization involved because we felt that this is something that demanded a comprehensive investigation, because part of the information that Maryland's team had gotten through their discovery were the contracts that showed that Sidney Powell had hired these people to go in and copy the software on behalf of the Trump campaign with another attorney for Donald Trump. She had paid for it, and it included other states. So that became a multi-state enterprise. And so that's why we were asking for this investigation. And I just want to be clear, when we talk about them taking the software and our concerns about them taking the software, we're saying that because it is a partisan, partisan organization or enterprise collection, coalition, taking software that have a very specific candidate that they're supporting. It's not the voting village where people are coming to try and understand what the systems are like. It's not taking the software and putting it up on GitHub like open source to try and improve the security. This software was taken and then it was covertly shared amongst members of the groups that worked, of people that worked for it, as I think Marilyn discussed. And so actually having the software introduces some security concerns. David is going to talk about them a little bit more. If you're at DEF CON, you probably understand what those security concerns are, but you don't have to take my word for it or David's word for it. Before we knew that these breaches had actually occurred, there were some statements that were made that discussed the threat that taking the software could present to our election systems. Dominion Voting Systems, one of the vendors who had their systems breached, said that giving the software to partisan entities would create irreparable damage to the commercial interests of the company and the election security interests of the nation. The Georgia Attorney General, back in late 2020, when defending against in a lawsuit that Sidney Powell and others were trying to access the voting software as part of a challenge to the Georgia election results, refused to give the software or argued against giving the software, arguing that it would give the keys to the software kingdom. And the Georgia State CTO had said it would give hackers a roadmap. So there are certain vulnerabilities that are introduced by the taking of the software. So Marilyn talked a great deal about what happened in Coffee County. So we can go quickly through that. And what I'm going to show you is that we find that there are other breaches and the same people keep showing up in the different breaches. Coffee County was paid for by Sidney Powell on behalf of defending the Republic and the Trump campaign. People involved were Doug Logan, Misty Hampton, Kathy Latham, a guy named Jim Penrose, who was very involved in that. And then the software was shared more broadly. And these are people that all got copies of the software, including Stephanie Lambert, who's a Michigan attorney that was involved in some breaches there, a guy named Conan Hayes, who was involved in a Mesa County breach, who was also in Colorado, was also received copies of software, and a guy named Ben Cotton, who shows up a lot in these stories. So we know that these guys were there for a couple days. But after the breaches occurred, the election official in Coffee County that permitted this extraordinary access went to Michigan, according to deposition testimony. First, Mike Lindell, for some bizarre reason, flew down to her to this small area in Georgia, was there for 2 hours and then left. We don't really know why about that. But then she was hired to do some election work in another county, and she also went to Michigan and met with some of the people involved in the breaches in Michigan. So what we've learned subsequently about the other breaches is this. So in Antrim County, Michigan, you may have heard that there were some significant vote counting mistakes that were made in 2020 because of a programming error there. The software, there was a legal challenge in that case. The judge permitted some people to have access to the software as part of that. Then it was shared more broadly. That currently is being litigated as to how legal it was for them to share that software. The defendants are arguing that they were permitted to. The state is arguing that they were not. So we'll see how that plays out in court. But again, this was paid for by Sidney Powell. Conan Hayes got copies of the software. Doug Logan did too. Matt DePerno was involved. There was also an attempted breach in Wayne County, Michigan. That's Detroit, the biggest county in Michigan. This again was paid for by Sidney Powell. She hired the same people that went into Coffee County, Sullivan Strickler. We don't have any evidence that it actually took place. It looks like they maybe tried to do it and it didn't work out. But we know this thanks to Marilyn's lawsuit. So this is a connection directly to that. And then again, many of the same people. There was also a breach in Cross Village Township in Emmett County, Michigan, where two guys came in dressed in tactical gear and said that they were there on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security and that they needed to access the voting equipment. Nobody really knows what they did, but it has been alleged in some court filings that this was orchestrated by Matt DePerno and Stephanie Lambert and a state representative there. And also, according to the Attorney General's filings, they allegedly got 5 voting tabulators from 4 locations, including from ES&S. They had those tabulators for several months, many of the same people involved, again, accessing those tabulators. Matt DePerno, who was at the center of this case, he's an attorney in Michigan, had gone to some public forums and spoke in front of the lectern and said that he had gotten access to these tabulators and he was able to figure out how to rig them, and that's what he was doing with these tabulators that they had in the Airbnb. Again, this is something that's currently being litigated in criminal trial in Michigan. That, unlike Marilyn's case, there was a criminal investigation. There's criminal prosecution going on now in Michigan. However, it's within the confines of Michigan. Nobody is looking at how all of these breaches may be connected in any potential way. There was also several breaches in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, where the, let's see, whoops, I went the wrong direction. If I have it here. Stephanie Lambert, the attorney on the upper left-hand corner from Michigan, got herself appointed to be the county attorney for this small rural county in Pennsylvania. And she convinced, or somebody convinced the county commissioners that they should turn the software over to have it examined by people who were hired once again by Sidney Powell. And they did that in several different instances. They got software in March of 2022 and then again in July of 2022. And this is according to some court records and some depositions as well as public statements on podcasts. There was also a breach in Mesa County, Colorado, which you might have heard of because there was a criminal investigation there for the election official that was involved in permitting it. She was sentenced to 9 years, but not for actually giving people access to software. She was sentenced to 9 years for some associated criminal activity. I don't have to say alleged if she was convicted. What she was convicted of was identity theft and some other things associated with what she did to allow that guy Conan Hayes that I talked to you about before to get access to the system. The software then showed up at a cyber symposium that was hosted by Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy, and so that was made public as well. So those are some of the people involved in Mesa County. In Maricopa County, there was people may have heard of the Cyber Ninjas audit that was done in 2021 after the 2020 election. As part of that, the Cyber Ninjas were permitted access to the software from Dominion, but then they turned around and they gave it to a guy, that guy Ben Cotton, whose name I've mentioned a couple times already, and he took it to his lab or his cabin, or I'm not sure how you qualify it, but his lodging in Montana, so he had access to it there. So I'm going to tie this up to how this actually reaches to higher levels and what we're seeing today. Marilyn mentioned that there was an effort in December of 2020, or there was a discussion in the White House Oval Office amongst President Trump and some other people discussing whether or not they should use the military or the Department of Homeland Security or the marshals of the Department of Justice to go in and seize voting machines. Some people counseled and said, this is a terrible idea, you cannot do this. And instead, Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell said, that's okay, we have voluntary access to the machines, we're going to get voluntary access anyway. That is according to testimony that was given to the January 6th committee that was never highlighted in any hearing or in the report, for that matter. I read a lot of the deposition testimony when it was published, and that's how we uncovered this. This was then reported by the New York Times because it suggests that this was discussed at this meeting at the White House. And so where are we today? It seems this is starting all over again, or maybe it never ended, but there have been reports that have come out of Colorado that once again there are people that are claiming to be associated with the Department of Homeland Security or the Trump administration that are asking election officials for access to voting equipment. So far, according to the reporting, nobody actually gave them access, but it's something that we should be profoundly aware of, because it seems like this is something that's happening again. So I will pause there and ask David to pick up, and I'll turn off my mic to...
Thank you, Susan. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the technical significance of the purloining of the voting system software that you've heard about. As you know, code from various Dominion and ES&S systems was taken, as Susan described. Jurisdictions normally using nominally the same systems actually use slight variations of the versions of the software. So the attackers now have a fair sample of the software used in the voting systems in the United States. We have no way of knowing, of course, if more software was taken that has not come to light from other jurisdictions. So who got access to this purloined software? Well, it was first circulated in the right-wing election security conspiracy community, and is known to have subsequently been made available on the dark web. So we should assume that not only they, but every foreign intelligence agency in the world has access to this code now. Who does not have access to the code? We don't. What do I mean by we? Okay? The white hat expert community, represented by those of us here at DEF CON, people who study voting systems, look for vulnerabilities, disclose those vulnerabilities responsibly to the vendors in the hopes of getting them fixed, or publish them if they don't. We don't have access to this, to the code. Those of us who've been involved in the top-to-bottom review, in court cases, we don't have access to it. Now, I want to note that the code that was taken in the incidents that Susan just outlined is binaries, not the source code. Primarily, the reason for that is that the election officials who cooperated with this don't even have access to the source code. They only have binaries. And so that's a good thing a little bit, but of course, the lack of having source code doesn't slow attackers down very much. Just a little bit. It doesn't stop it, though. The code, for one thing, the binaries are not obfuscated code. Obfuscation is a technique to make software very difficult to reverse engineer. The election code isn't that way. And so the barriers are relatively low. There are power tools to help reverse engineers figure out what's going on in code and to help them instrument it and step through it and watch it in detail. And of course, they can reverse engineer, they can decompile the code and get a version, a reasonably readable version of the source code if they want to look at particular parts of the code. So the fact that they did not capture, and of course we don't know that they don't have the source code from other sources. In fact, I wouldn't be too surprised if they did, but they didn't catch it in these heists. Okay, so what is the danger now that this software has been purloined and spread around to who knows whom? Well, the primary danger is that bad actors can study this code at their leisure. We have 2 years between major elections. 2 years is plenty of time to reverse engineer and study the code and look for vulnerabilities in it. And if you find a vulnerability that is immediately exploitable, for example, so that you can simply create a process for a poll worker or someone who has custody of the voting machines between elections to tamper with the systems, that's a danger that we worry about. There's also the possibility that they can create malicious versions, variants of the real software, and then find a way of getting those malicious variants actually loaded in real elections. How can they do that? Well, they can do that with Confederates, for example, among election officials or among the employees of election officials. Think that's unlikely? Well, Susan just told you several stories about election officials who have been who have been involved in undermining the security of their own elections. But it can also be, but malicious code can also be spread through election machine viruses. We know that this is possible in many different voting systems. These are ways that software can be moved from one election machine to another, introduced on one machine only, and then it can be spread slowly through all of the voting machines in a jurisdiction. We've never seen this happen in real life, of course, I want to make that clear, but it has been demonstrated in publications showing how this can be done, have been demonstrated. It's easy to create malicious software, by the way, that would not be detected by the kind of testing done in certification programs or by logic and accuracy testing that is done immediately prior to an election. It's easy for malicious software to defeat that kind of testing. So, given that this software is out there, we don't know who has it, we don't know what they're trying to do with it. What is it that we can do to defeat these potential exploits and malicious software and protect our elections? The answer to that will be talked about for the rest of the afternoon, but the answers are evidence-based elections, software independence, and risk-limiting audits. And stay tuned for the rest of the afternoon and you will hear all about those.
Thanks, David. Jessica, can you?
We still have 10 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. So this is fun. This was a really big story for me personally, not just because it took months to get out, but because it took so much defense of the story, even after it was published, and there was so much evidence that I had put together. I wrote down Blue Anon Chicken Little, which are words that look very funny together, but if you were questioning the 2024 election, especially in the world of journalism, they were calling you Blue Anon, a conspiracy theorist. You must have just really wanted Kamala Harris to win, and that's why you're upset and that's why you're talking about this. The letter that was written in part by Marilyn Marks and a group of cybersecurity and election security experts, it came out on November 13th. I saw it on my X feed, and after reading through it, I immediately knew it was legitimate because they weren't saying, you know, this election was stolen, we see evidence of fraud. They were saying it was possible because of these massive, well-documented breaches, and it would be quite simple compared to what we did in 2020 to do a swing state audit of a statistically significant sample of ballots to confirm that the results of the 2024 election were truly the will of the people. It just made sense. The problem was there was another duty to warn letter sent on November 8th, and then another on the 15th. And people confused this letter with that one. So every time I would pitch this, people would say, no, I already saw that. Wasn't it debunked by Snopes? And you would expect journalists to actually read what you're sending them. That wasn't the case. There seemed to be like a fear of being labeled a conspiracy theorist, but I didn't come from the world of journalism. I came from a working class family. I don't have any kind of reputation to upkeep, so thankfully I could focus on the truth and focus on the story. And I called Marilyn, and at first she was skeptical of me. I didn't know it's because you had bail bondsmen threatening you in the past. But thankfully she came around and started sharing this story with me. And I spoke to Professor Buell, Duncan Buell, who was on that letter, Buell, and I spoke to representatives from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency. I spoke to people at ES&S and Dominion. I spoke to Secretary of States and election administrating offices in the swing states. And I was shocked at how unprepared so many people were to respond to me and how obviously sound the arguments being made by you all were. And the thing about this is it was really overshadowed by January 6th, because what went down was on January 7th and 8th. And so because there was this belief that the country was in turmoil after an insurrection, it felt like people thought that should be the focus. And what happened on January 7th and 8th potentially is more serious because it can impact every election to come. And so there were 3 people who entered that day What's shocking is the communication is so obvious in court records. They weren't trying to hide what they were doing at all. Sidney Powell hired Jim Penrose, who is this guy with 27 years of experience in the NSA and CIA and cybersecurity. And he was kind of the one directing Sullivan Strickler as to what they should do. But in many cases, Paul Maggio from Sullivan Strickler was directly communicating with Sidney Powell. And that morning, on January 7th, said, on our way to Coffee County, Georgia, to collect what we can from election/voting machines and systems. Then we see him on the security camera footage entering at 12:37 p.m. and leaving at 6:19 p.m. And then sending an email the very next day to Powell saying everything went smoothly yesterday with the Coffee County election. Everyone involved was extremely helpful. So that means the county election boards guy that was there and Kathy Latham, who was with the Republican Party there. They then said, we're considering all of the data collected, or consolidating all of the data collected, and will be uploading it to our secure sites for access by your team. Now, we know because of the Curling v. Raffensperger lawsuit what they got. Forensic images of an election server on Maggio's hard drive with Sullivan Strickler, ballot images, election management servers, a folder titled Dominion Supplied Laptop, tabulators, thumb drives to program the tabulators, and copies of the voting machines. And so this gets reported out by the Associated Press. Separately, you have reporting coming out of these text messages between Cyber Ninja's CEO Doug Logan and Jim Penrose, where Penrose says, here's the plan, let's keep this close. We only have until Saturday to decide if we're going to use this report to try to decertify the Senate runoff election or if we hold it for a bigger moment. Now, Sullivan Strickler had this case for why they were pretty much criminally innocent for what they had done, and it's that we were directed by an officer of the court. Sidney Powell's an attorney. Why would we think what we were doing was improper or illegal? And so that's how they got away with that. But it was the same guys doing this in Michigan on the very same email chain where they hired and coordinating this effort in Georgia. And in Michigan, we know they had 5 tabulators, but like Susan said, the last it's left off is there's no evidence of tampering. That doesn't mean there isn't any out there, that just means they haven't found it. It might still exist. We'll see what the outcome is of that litigation. But Curling v. Raffensperger was this case where it was determined 27,000 Dominion voting machines should be replaced because they were not secure. And the result of that was they replaced them with new Dominion touchscreen voting machines. And then the litigation was reopened. And that's when we saw a report from Dr. Alex Halderman. He said there are 10 to 12 vulnerabilities that someone familiar with his report, some of it's redacted. We have a redacted version that's public, but I spoke to someone who had read the unredacted version, and this is basically what he told me. There are 10 to 12 vulnerabilities that a reasonable undergrad computer science student would ask about. Here's how to attack them without much effort. And then, in a deposition in February of 2022 during the same case, Michael Barnes was asked, can you identify one cybersecurity election expert that would endorse the Georgia system as a reliable voting system? And on the witness stand, they said, I cannot. They couldn't find a single person to vouch for the system that was being relied upon for American elections. It's just comical how bad this was. And this reporting was coming out in so many different sources. So the story was never really put together. It was coming out in piecemeal. But as a result of all of these cases and people complaining to federal agencies on a pretty regular basis, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, released a recommendation that elections would be audited, and in the cases where they were using machines where there were vulnerabilities, they would replace them or update the software to patch the identified insecurities, because 70% of our voting machines are ES&S systems from Michigan and Dominion systems from Georgia. So theoretically, if they had copied this software and developed a hack, they could use it in all of the swing states and determine the results of an election if they had really wanted to. And so that's what's really concerning is especially the fact that Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, here in Nevada and Pennsylvania were relying on these systems in 2020. So then comes case DeKalb GOP versus Raffensperger. So the county GOP was suing the Secretary of State in Georgia because they believed that the system that was being relied upon was so insecure it wasn't up to grade according to Georgia law. And I believe there was a federal law at play as well. Now, there's a video on Judge Scott McAfee's YouTube page of this, but one of the witnesses, Clay Parikh, demonstrated how to hack into one of the voting machines from the witness stand. That went on YouTube September 30th, 2024, just over a month before the 2024 election. And I've asked people familiar with these machines, you know, if we pulled someone off the street and showed them this YouTube tutorial and said, all right, now you have to hack this voting machine, could they do it? And they said, maybe not someone off the street, but maybe an undergrad computer science student could, certainly, easily. And it's remained available. You can still go watch it today if you'd like to. But what Parikh said was the massive amount of vulnerabilities in this system, the poor configuration of the database itself, even if you encrypted the database, someone mid-level could take over. And so putting this story together felt like, you know the Three Little Pigs? It felt like if the Washington Post had reported, like, pigs are making houses out of straw. And then CNN reported, oh, pigs making their houses out of their straw lost their homes, they blew down. And then you have Bloomberg saying, pigs are making their houses out of sticks now. And then CNBC saying, this is going to be good for the long-term house values in America. And then you call Marilyn Marks, and she says, have you heard about the big bad wolf? And you're like, well, no. And she's like, yeah, someone's blowing the houses down. And then you talk to Professor Buell, and he's like, well, we could just make them out of brick. And then you tell your friend, who's a very responsible journalist who reads just about everything, and you're like, have you heard about all of this? And he says, yeah, I heard pigs are making houses out of sticks now, and it used to be straw. And it's like, you haven't heard about the big bad wolf? And he's like, you sound crazy, and it's because you do. And that's what it was like putting this story together. But once you put it together, it becomes really clear what's gone on. And so I think I understand what happened recently, why I had to fight so hard for this story. I was talking to Charles Seif, who's a mass surveillance expert. And he said, you know, I reported on aerial surveillance the FBI was doing. It was just flying helicopters over cities. They were collecting data on citizens. We call it persistent surveillance. He said you would tell someone about what was happening, and they were shocked. They couldn't believe the FBI was doing this to American citizens. And then you tell them 3 months later, and they're shocked again. And that's how this story felt. It was me realizing as a journalist that sometimes when you tell the truth, it's not heard, and you have to fight for it to be heard. And I think we're still fighting, but people are coming around, and you all might relate to this, but a big challenge is people hear these big computer science data words, and they're like, oh, they sound like they've secured the system. It sounds fine. They know what they're talking about. And so overcoming that barrier has been a huge challenge as well. So I would encourage all of you to talk to people in your life you know about it. And the last thing I'll say is that if we were to audit the 2020 election, it would require less than 1/3 of the votes that were counted in Maricopa County in 2020 to be counted now. So it's not like it would be a unique, massive effort to audit the 2024 election.
You want to try? Well, it was.
Only piece of it. Didn't have her voice.
Okay. We're going to try and get you that audio piece that the computers glitched and did not allow us to play. I know that's shocking that the computers glitched and we weren't able to get it, but hopefully now we can play it. And then
we were hacked.
We were hacked.
You know,
and then we'll.
I'm the guy that chartered the jet to go down to Coffee County to have them inspect all of those computers, and I've heard zero. Okay? I went down there, we scanned every freaking ballot, and the elections director and her assistant lost their job. Okay? And have yet learned zero about all of that effort.
Well, why did they not give you any information?
That's a great question. as to why all of that data, we haven't had a report from anybody. And I keep saying, guys, all of that effort, the same people that went up to Michigan, okay, and did all that forensic stuff on the computers, and they sent their team down to Coffee County, Georgia, and they scanned all the equipment, imaged all the hard drives, and scanned every single ballot, absentee in person, and absentee by mail, and have gotten no feedback.
They imaged the hard drives?
Yes.
How in the world did you get permission to do that?
We basically had the entire elections committee there. Okay? And they said, we give you permission. Go for it. So they went in there and imaged every hard drive of every piece of equipment, all the poll pads.
I think this is repeating. I think we can cut it now. But I wanted to follow up on what Jessica was saying. This tape was it is on. The tape is, can you hear me now? Okay, the tape was available a year before we could get anybody to listen to it or begin to even investigate. Like Jessica was saying, nobody wanted to believe this could possibly be true. But she was talking about, and David had talked about, the ease of hacking. Come tomorrow at noon, we're going to show you a live demonstration of hacking a Dominion touchscreen machine, which is in the other room, and you will also have a chance to interact with that in the other room, the Dominion ICX, but we will show you live how easy it is to hack, and the hacking is so easy, even I can do it. And that is a very low threshold. I'm not a computer, I have no computer science training at all. So it's pretty shocking, please come.
Okay, so we have a couple of minutes if people have some questions to, yes?
So, in light of the fact that, in light of the fact that I think the DHS and DOJ have asked for voting records and also the registration records from a number of states, how does that dovetail into all of this activity?
So the articles that I put up there, those are about, there was articles that lumped them together, that they said that they're asking for that information, and then that they're also, there have been these inquiries from people that have represented that they were from Department of Homeland Security or from the White House that were asking for access to voting equipment.
Is the voter records and registration records?
Right. So I think that people are viewing them both as efforts to access information that might be used in the future regarding the election. But there's appears to be an effort to get the machines again. The records, voter registration records are slightly different. Well, very different. Wait for the. She's coming with the microphone. And then check her.
A few different times you said that Sidney Powell paid the various people to. Where did she come up with the money to do that?
So that's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever done any investigation to trace where that money came from. We know that she was raising a lot of money for the Defending the Republic PAC. But if there were other sources, it would be great to know. But no, because we're lacking any sort of comprehensive investigation into the multi-pronged effort, we really don't know.
The bail bondsman, Scott Hall, who was indicted ultimately, he was also, we believe, funded through his attorney that was connected to Trump campaign and David, Citizens United, what's the guy's name? David, not coming up with it, but anyway, there was also funding, we think, coming into Georgia. What? No.
What did you feel that Scott's motivations were for calling you on March 7th? Because it sounds like he's trying to clear his conscience, but at the same time he's pissed. Like, what did you feel?
Okay, so I didn't have a chance to, of course, give the whole hour-and-a-half conversation, but he had called me threatening me saying, look, I have hacked into your litigation files. I want this, and this that I can't find, and you will get it for me. And at that point, I thought, maybe I'll try to talk nice to him and record this conversation. And that it drifted. It was 50 minutes into the conversation before he started doing this, telling me what he heard.
Hi. Are there efforts to, I'm over here. Hi. Are there efforts to kind of bring together the Texas gerrymandering information, the voting records in Texas? Because I know that they're trying to set a trend in Texas to gerrymander districts, to redistrict with voter records. Do you see evidence of that starting to happen in these states where those records were taken? Because I know this other person asked about why voter records. Well, isn't that really important to how we redistrict our maps to create safe states? Do you see that evidence happening?
I think that evidence is pretty much public in terms of how you would go about redistricting. But I think that the voter records are probably being accessed for a variety of reasons of trying to question voters' eligibility. But I would also say in Georgia and other places as well, there are problems with the voting machines and ballot privacy. There is no ballot secrecy in Georgia. There's supposed to be. And I really worry that those detail records can be used to trace the ballots to the voters.
How much of the phone conversation was recorded?
Recorded almost all of it, and it's public record, except the very beginning, because I had no idea who this guy was or why he was calling me. I didn't get the part where he was saying, hey, look, I hacked into your system. And I tried to pick it up later in the conversation. He quit talking about it. But I have well over an hour of the conversation recorded. But yeah, he wanted our files and had basically was saying, look, I know a lot of people. I get what I want.
Hi. So I find it kind of ironic that a lot of times people on conservative side tend to talk a lot about election security, and a lot of these groups tend to be conservative groups that are doing these things. Is there any evidence to support that? Like, do we see any like liberal or Democrat groups doing the same thing, or is it all just hot air coming from their side, or maybe some projection? Like,
when you were saying doing the same thing, you were talking about
election security breaches and stuff like that.
Election security
copying
breaches.
Machines. Like, a lot of these groups tend to be tied to conservative groups.
Right.
Funded by conservative groups.
Right. I have not seen evidence of people that seem to claim that they are unaffiliated or more progressive involved in any of the networks that Susan and I have examined. And by the way, I should say, thank you, Susan, for making sure that this happened today. Susan was an incredible partner. We were on the phone 3 times a day going, oh, look at that affidavit. Oh, look at this testimony. And pieced this thing together over many, many months. And unfortunately, we were about the only 2 in the world doing it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, not entirely, but I'll say everything that I showed you are all the extent of every election system security breach that I am aware of. If there were ones on the left, they would be up there too. The reason these are specifically interesting and compelling to me is because they all seem to be tied together because you keep seeing the same people involved. Either they were there at the breach or they got the copy of the software that was taken or the same people paid for it. If there were, if there was a parallel effort, you would have seen that too. We're nonpartisan.
I haven't seen any, so
Yeah.
thank you.
You all only saw a short version of the list of names. The list of names is very long of people who were in the background involved in this. It would take hours to go through them all, but the network is unbelievably connected.
Any other questions? Am I missing? If not,
Actually,
thank you all
there's one
so
more
much
question.
for your attention. Oh, wait. Sorry.
Hello. I have kind of a convoluted question, but based on the fact that there was at least one piece of evidence you threw up here that showed that they had taken a report and had intended to use it for some purpose, was there ever a response from the DOJ or the FBI as to whether or not they had looked at conspiracy or conspiracy to commit or conspiracy to interact in some way across multiple states?
This is a great question. I'm sorry, I should have included this in my presentation. So I mentioned that in late 2022, we organized an effort of a bunch of computer scientists to write to the Department of Homeland Security, DOJ, FBI, etc., putting together all the information that came out of the curling litigation, saying, hey, this is a civil litigation. We understand maybe you're not following every civil litigation, but it seems like this is something that needs to be investigated to determine if there was criminal activity here, and that it seems like it's something that should be investigated by the feds because it seems to go across state lines. I got a letter back from the FBI a couple months later that said, well, we can only investigate this if we are asked to by the local state authorities, which in itself is untrue because we see there are civil rights violations that have often been ignored or potentially even perpetrated by local authorities, and then the feds come in and they investigate it. So they're not being asked to engage in those instances. But moreover, while the Secretary of State in Georgia, as Marilyn pointed out, had been saying nothing to see here, this never happened, the State Election Board, which is a parallel authority, was concerned and actually did ask the FBI to investigate, and the FBI still did not investigate. Subsequently, I ultimately did go to DC and meet with some investigators there and speak with them about this at length. And they took down a bunch of information and nothing happened. So yes, I should have included that. Yeah, we should close off because it's lunchtime. So thank you so much for your attention.
And let me suggest that you come back at 1:30 for our keynote speech by the former California Secretary of State, Deborah Bowen.